The lake was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from the absence of sound, but the deep, restful hush that feels like a lullaby to the soul. It lay nestled between two forested hills, cradled like a secret the world had forgotten. Mist curled gently over its surface, kissed by the pale gold of early morning light. At the edge of the lake, half covered in reeds and moss, rested an old wooden boat. Its paint had long since faded, worn away by the gentle gnaw of time and weather. The boat pointed slightly upward, as if still remembering a time when it sliced eagerly through the water. The boat did not float anymore. It simply rested, part vessel, part memory. No one came here much anymore. The town beyond the hills had grown quieter over the years, its people moving on to bigger cities, faster lives, brighter distractions. But the lake remained, and so did the boat. On this morning, the lake shimmered like a sheet of melted silver. A Huron stood motionless near the shore, waiting, listening. Dragonflies hummed in the reeds, their wings catching the light like tiny shards of glass. The boat, though still, seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the lake. Slow, patient, eternal. Once, many years ago, the boat had a name. Luna, painted in blue script on her side. She had carried fishermen into the misty dawn, lovers under starlit skies, and laughing children who leaned over her sides to watch the minnows dance in the shallows. She remembered. She remembered the boy who used to come with his grandfather, the boy with wide eyes and a straw hat too big for his head. He would sit at the front, holding onto the sides as if the lake were an ocean, and he its brave explorer. The grandfather would row gently, his hands steady, his stories floating through the cool morning air like drifting leaves. One story, in particular, the boy always asked for: the spirit of the lake. He would listen with bated breath as the old man spoke of a guardian who lived beneath the water, sleeping in the roots of the mountains, stirring only when someone truly listened. The lake has a voice, he would say, but it speaks in silence. As the seasons passed, the visits slowed. The grandfather grew frailer. The boy grew taller, and one day they stopped coming altogether. Years turned to decades. Storms came and went. Leaves fell and grew again. Snow blanketed the hills and melted in quiet renewal. The boat grew older. Her wood softened. Her seams opened. But the lake held her gently, never pushing her away. They had grown old together. And then, one early autumn morning, footsteps returned. A man, perhaps in his 30s, stepped through the tall grass at the water's edge. He wore a coat that had once been elegant, but was now wrinkled and faded. His eyes were tired, but when he saw the boat, they brightened. Not with surprise, but with recognition. He knelt beside her, running his hand over the weathered bow. "You're still here," he whispered. It was the boy, grown now, carrying the echo of his childhood in the quiet way he looked at things. He sat down beside the boat, legs crossed like he used to, and stared out over the lake. For a long time, he said nothing. Only the wind answered, rustling the reeds and playing gently with his hair. Then, slowly, he began to speak. Not to anyone in particular. Maybe to the lake. Maybe to the memory of his grandfather. Maybe just to the silence. "I lost my way," he said. "I got so caught up trying to be someone else. Someone loud. Someone fast. But everything felt hollow." He paused, picking up a smooth stone and skipping it across the water. The ripples danced outward in delicate rings. "I remembered what he used to say," he continued, "about how the lake listens, about how you can only hear its voice when you read quiet enough to really feel it." The old boat creaked slightly. Whether it was the shifting wind or something more, the man smiled. He stayed by the lake until the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in brushstrokes of amber and rose. As he stood to leave, he placed his hand gently on the boat once more. "I'll come back," he promised. "Maybe even bring my daughter. I'll tell her the stories. I'll teach her to listen." And with that, he walked away, his footsteps soft on the earth. The lake sighed beneath the setting sun. The Huron took flight, its wings a slow unfolding of grace. The dragonflies disappeared into the shadows, And the boat? Luna dreamed again. She dreamed of moonlit glides and whispered tellies, of laughter, of silence, of a boy and his grandfather, of a girl not yet born. She dreamed not of moving, but of being, held by the water, kissed by the wind. Remember, the lake held its stories close, like treasures buried beneath stillness, and the old boat, though still, was never empty. Autumn passed like a sigh, golden leaves spinning down like falling memories. The lake grew colder, the mornings cloaked in thicker mist. And then, one bright winter morning, she came, a girl no more than 7, bundled in a woolen coat, her boots crunching lightly on the frosted grass. Her cheeks were pink from the walk, her eyes wide with wonder. Behind her, the man followed, slower now, carrying a small bag and a folded blanket under his arm. "Papa, is that it?" the girl asked, pointing to the moss-covered boat. "That's her," he said, kneeling beside her. Luna, the girl, stepped closer, crouched, and reached out. Her fingers traced the wood, brushing aside a patch of frost. "She's beautiful. She used to glide across this lake," the man said softly, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the memories sleeping in the silence, like a feather on water. "Can we ride her?" she asked eagerly. He smiled, wistful. "She doesn't float anymore, but she remembers." They sat together on the blanket, close to the boat's side. The man opened a thermos and poured warm cocoa into a little cup. The girl sipped carefully, eyes never leaving the lake. "Did Grandpa really meet the lake spirit here?" "That's what he told me," the man said, gazing across the still water. "He said the lake had secrets, and if you listened long enough, it might tell you one." "What kind of secrets?" she asked, lowering her voice. He looked at her, something shining in his eyes. Not sadness, but a kind of full-hearted remembering. Stories, not loud ones, quiet ones, the kind that wait patiently to be found. The girl looked around, as if the trees themselves might whisper, "Can I tell the lake a secret?" "Of course." She leaned close to the water, her breath visible in the cold. "I'm scared of storms," she said, barely above a whisper. "But I want to be brave." Like the boat, the wind stirred gently, brushing her hair. The reeds rustled. A single snowflake drifted down, delicate as a dream. And for a moment, the lake seemed to listen. That evening, before they left, the man placed something beside the boat, an old wooden oar, wrapped in cloth. "It was Grandpa's," he explained to the girl. "He carved stories into the handle. See these lines?" The girl touched the small, faded notches. "He used to say they were maps," the man smiled. "Not of places, but of moments." They left the oar resting against Luna's side. A bridge, a promise. Spring tiptoed in on soft feet. Snow melted from the hills. The lake's glassy surface sparkled under gentler skies. Birds returned, buds opened, and with them came the girl. Now a little older, her hair longer, her steps more confident. She came often, always with her father, though sometimes he would stay back on the hill, letting her wander alone. The boat, still and solemn, became her friend, her secret place. One morning, she found something resting in Luna's worn hull, a single golden feather. She blinked, picked it up, held it to the light. It shimmered, not bright, but warm, like sun through leaves. She ran to her father. "Papa, look what I found." He turned it over in his hand, eyes widening. "It's like the one Grandpa carved into the oar." They looked at the handle again, and there it was, a tiny feather etched with care, tucked into a swirl of waves and stars. He had carved it long ago. A symbol, a message. The girl held the feather tight. "Is it from the lake spirit?" Her father didn't answer right away. He looked out at the still water, the way it mirrored the sky, the clouds, the trees. "Maybe," he said finally, "or maybe it's from someone who wants you to keep listening." The girl tucked the feather into her coat. From that day on, she began to write stories. Little ones at first. About the boat, about the feather, about a quiet lake that remembered everything. She left them in a small tin box by Luna's side. Stories folded in half, written with crooked letters and pencil smudges. And every time she returned, another feather would be waiting, sometimes white, sometimes soft gray, sometimes speckled. Once, a feather so small it looked like a snowflake. The girl never told anyone what the lake whispered to her, but her eyes grew wiser, her voice steadier. She walked with a calm only the trees and the wind understood. The girl was growing up. Now in her teenage years, she walked with a quiet strength, as if she carried something unseen and sacred inside her. While other teenagers hurried past the woods, eyes on glowing screens and fast lives, she still walked the winding trail to the lake, always with a satchel slung over her shoulder and a golden feather tucked in a leather-bound journal. Luna, the old boat, had weathered more seasons. Moss had crept farther up her sides. A birch tree leaned protectively nearby, its roots twisting gently toward her hull. But Luna was not forgotten. The girl had a plan. She brought sandpaper and brushes. She brought oil and rags. Slowly, over the course of many Saturdays, she began to clean the boat's frame, speaking softly to her as she worked. "I know you're tired," she would whisper, "but there's still something beautiful in you." With each careful stroke, stories returned. She imagined Luna shivering with the memory of moonlight dances, of water rushing past her sides, of laughter echoing under summer stars. One day, her father stood watching her from the hill. He carried a package wrapped in cloth, long and narrow. When he reached her side, he unwrapped it to reveal the carved or "Grandpa's," he said, placing it gently into her hands. She traced the feather etched into the wood, and something fluttered inside her. Not fear, not even wonder, but purpose. Quiet, steady purpose. "I think it's time we tried to move her," she said. That summer, father and daughter worked side by side. They reinforced Luna's frame with cedar planks, soaked and steamed like the old ways. The boat groaned sometimes, as if protesting the sudden stirrings after so many years of stillness. But she held. On the morning they pushed her toward the lake, the world seemed to hush. Even the wind paused in the trees. Dragonflies hovered like sentries above the water, and in the stillness, something ancient stirred. They waited, knee-deep, guiding Luna forward. The lake met her with a hush, a long, slow welcome. And then, she floated, not high or fast, not like the days of old, but enough to carry a memory forward. The girl stepped in first, the oar in her hand, the golden feather tied to the handle with twine. Her father smiled but stayed on shore. "This one's yours now." She rowed gently into the quiet. The boat creaked, the oar dipped, and the lake rippled with recognition. She didn't go far, just to the center, where the water deepened and the hills bowed low. She stopped there, letting the boat drift. Around her, silence bloomed. Not emptiness, but fullness, the hush of things that know their place. She closed her eyes, let her breath match the rhythm of the water. She didn't need to speak aloud. The lake knew. She felt it then, not in words, but in something deeper. A message passed down, not through sound, but through stillness. "You are the keeper of the quiet now, the guardian of memory, the one who listens." When she opened her eyes, a feather drifted from above, not golden, but soft and gray-blue like stormlight. It landed beside her in the boat, as if placed there by the sky itself. She smiled. "I'll carry it all," she whispered. "The silence, the stories, the stillness, and the lake in its vast hush," replied. The girl grew into a woman with soft eyes and a stillness that drew others near. She remained close to the lake, living in a small cottage tucked between whispering trees. Luna rested nearby, now restored and covered with a simple tarp. When it rained, as if tucked in by the wind itself, and on her desk, always open, always waiting, was a thick leather journal titled "The Quiet Lake and the Old Boat's Story." She wrote every morning. She wrote in silence, letting the mist outside guide her hand. Some days it was memory. Some days it was dreams. Other times it was what the lake whispered. not in sentences, but in rhythm. The slow hush of ripples, the creak of aging wood, the wind's patient hum. Her book was not a history, it was a remembrance, a gathering of the lake soul. And somehow, without intention, it began to travel. First, she gave a copy to a boy who came to sketch the reeds at dusk. Then a teacher asked if she could read it aloud to her class. Soon, copies were left in the village library, then passed along to distant relatives. And finally, it was printed, properly printed, with soft cream pages and a cover the color of wet bark. People came, not tourists with maps and cameras, but travelers of the heart, poets, old men with aching hands, children too quiet for the noise of their schools, women who had lost their songs. They followed the book's soft trail to the lake's edge, where they sat quietly beneath the trees, letting the hush fill them. And she welcomed them all, not with speeches, but with tea and time. One evening, she sat beside Luna as the sun sank behind the hills. The sky was rose-colored and slow. A small girl stood nearby, watching her with wide eyes. She had freckles and a notebook too big for her hands. "Are the stories real?" the girl asked. The woman, older now, but still carrying the hush of youth in her breath, looked at the lake. "They're as real as you are." "Did the boat really use to speak?" The woman smiled. "She still does, but not in words." The girl crouched down and placed her ear against Luna's wooden side. After a moment, she nodded. "I heard it." The woman didn't ask what she heard. Some things are meant to be kept. That winter, something strange happened. Ice crept toward the lake, as usual, but never reached its heart. The center stayed open, like an eye watching the sky. Birds flew overhead. Even in January, the trees hummed at night. One morning, the woman found a bundle left beside the boat. Inside, a pair of child's gloves, a letter, and a drawing. The drawing showed Luna, not moored on the grass, but sailing once again, her wooden frame strong. Her bow pointed toward the stars. The letter read, "My daughter says she dreamt the boat was flying. I think she's right. Thank you for keeping the lake's memory." And below it, in a child's handwriting, "Please sail her again. I think she misses the water." So the woman gathered her strength. She called on the friends who had helped her restore Luna years ago. They came with their children, with oil and sandpaper and new ropes. The whole village stirred like spring waking from frost. By midsummer, Luna was not only restored, she was ready. They chose the evening of the silver moon, the time the lake was always brightest, when the air seemed thick with stories. Candles were lit along the shore. Songs were sung, not loudly, but in the way lullabies are sung to the night. The woman, now older, stepped into Luna once more. This time, she was not alone. Children sat beside her, their small hands steady on the oars. The lake welcomed them with a stillness that shimmered like silver silk. As they pushed off, a quiet cheer rose behind them. Not a roar, but a breath held in awe. They rode to the center. The moon rose high, and above them, the clouds parted gently, as if watching. And then, as they floated beneath the stars, the woman opened her hands. She held a feather, golden, faintly glowing. The wind stirred, and the lake, after all these years, spoke again, not in words, but in knowing. And every child in that boat heard it. The lake had grown quieter, but never empty. It was a place now passed on through whispers, not announcements. Children learned of it, not in classrooms, but in the pauses between lullabies. Grandparents mentioned it, not as a destination, but as something remembered between dreams. And those who arrived didn't come to find anything. They came to feel something, something they'd forgotten how to name. The stories lived in the breeze. The hush was no longer a secret. It was a kind of music. And one autumn morning, when the air smelled of wood smoke and pine needles, a girl named Ilya stepped onto the old dock with a notebook pressed to her chest. She was 12. Quiet, watchful, carrying too many questions for someone her age, and not nearly enough answers. She had read the book of the lake, the one written long ago by the woman with the golden feather. A gift from her uncle, who said, "This saved me. Once, maybe it will guide you." Ilya had read it 3 times. She didn't come because she believed. She came because she wanted to. Now, Luna waited before her. The boat was older, patched many times, but strong as ever. A ship built of memory and care. She stepped in. The boat rocked gently and settled, as if sighing with recognition. She didn't row. She didn't need to. The boat drifted. The water, smooth as brushed glass, reflected everything. Her hair, her wondering eyes, the trembling in her fingers, and something else just beneath the surface. A flicker of light. A feather, maybe. Or a thought. She clutched the notebook. It had only blank pages. Not yet, she thought. Then, from the mist, a voice. Not loud. Not even a word. Just the softest note. Like a lullaby you half remember from before you were born. Ilya closed her eyes. And something opened. She was not on the lake anymore. Or she was, but not as it had been. The boat floated through time, through story, through the echo of everything that had come before. The woman was there. The one with white hair and wind in her smile. Younger, older. All at once, she stood on the distant shore, watching, but not speaking. Behind her, the girl from long ago. The first one, with the feather in her braid and the hush in her chest. She was painting clouds in the sky with her fingers. And further still, the father sanding wood by lamplight. The fairy drifting just above the grass. The baker holding a cup of tea. The wind chime ringing without wind. All of them, not as ghosts, but as truths. Moments that had never stopped echoing. Ilya held her breath. The woman looked at her, and though her mouth didn't move, the message was clear. You are not here to repeat the story. You are here to carry it forward. Ilya opened her notebook, and finally wrote. Not a sentence, not even a full word, just the first letter. But it was enough. The moment her pencil touched the page, the world shimmered, a ripple on the surface of still water. The feather appeared beside her, resting on the seat of the boat. Not glowing, not magical, just real. She smiled and let the silence stretch. It wasn't empty. It was full of echoes, of whispers, of beginnings. When Ilya stepped out of the boat and back onto the dock, no one waited, but everything was listening. And from that day on, people began to notice her. Not because she was loud or brilliant or strange, but because she had that look in her eyes, the one that said, I hear what you're not saying. I see what's underneath. She began to write, not just fairy tales, but truths wrapped in warmth. She became a kind of lantern in the village. Others began writing, too. The hush moved from the lake to the people. It grew not smaller, but finer, like music that can only be heard when you truly stop. And Luna still drifted. But now, every time it returned to shore, there was a new notebook on the seat. Some filled with words, some with drawings, some with nothing but the mark of a feather pressed against the page. And the lake, it never aged, it never tired. It simply kept reflecting every person, every truth, every echo, waiting patiently for anyone to listen again. And when they did, they always found their way back. Time passed, as it always does. The woman, the girl who had once listened by the lake, who had restored the old boat, who had written the stories, grew older still. Her steps slowed. Her hair turned white like the crest of small waves, but her eyes stayed the same, calm, knowing, full of the hush that only comes from a lifetime of listening. She no longer needed to write. Others were writing now. Others were listening. Children carried notebooks to the lake. Teenagers brought guitars and sang lullabies. They had written about Luna. Travelers still came, not in crowds, but like petals on the breeze. And when they left, they were quieter somehow, as if the lake had pressed a gentle finger to their lips. One autumn evening, the woman sat alone in Luna again. The leaves around the lake had turned to flame, amber, rust, and gold. The air smelled like memory. She didn't row. She simply drifted. The boat moved on its own, guided by some invisible rhythm. The sky darkened to velvet. Stars shimmered above, and in that quiet, something shifted. She looked into the water and saw not just her reflection, but every version of herself. The little girl with wide eyes, the teenager, sending wood beside her father, the young woman offering a feather to a child, the elder whispering stories by firelight. All of them gazed back, not as memories, but as truths, as layers. And then, the water shimmered. Something rose from its surface. Not a creature, not a person. A feeling, a breath, a hush, and within it, a message. Not from the ferry, not from the lake, but from the story itself. You have returned us to ourselves. Now, we will carry you. She smiled. A single tear traced down her cheek, not of sadness, but of being seen, fully, completely, forever. And in the moonlight, the boat continued to drift, slow and gentle, until it reached the far side of the lake, a shore no one had seen in years, maybe ever. That was the last time anyone saw her. In the morning, Luna floated alone by the shore, tied neatly to the dock. Inside the boat, resting where she once sat, was her journal, now complete, bound with twine. A feather tucked inside, a note lay beside it in a familiar, looping handwriting. Keep listening, keep telling. The hush is alive in you now. Years turned into decades. The cottage remained, but others tended it now. Children who had grown into keepers, artists, healers, teachers. The lake became known not as a destination, but as a threshold, a place you visited not to escape the world, but to return to it more whole. And Luna, she still floated. Not every day, not often, only when the wind whispered, when the sky turned a certain kind of blue, when a child walked the path, barefoot and silent, feather in hand and story in heart. One such child was named Leela. She was quiet, thoughtful, carried a little box of feathers wherever she went. One afternoon, she found herself alone beside the boat. She stepped inside, the wood creaking just right. The boat didn't move, so she waited. She closed her eyes and listened to the ripple of the water, to the birds above, to the ache and wonder in her own chest. And slowly, the hush returned. The boat stirred, and Luna, old as wood, young as memory, sailed again. And so the lake speaks still, not loudly, never loudly, but in the hush between footsteps, in the silence after the last page, in the still water that reflects more than your face. And if you ever find yourself there, on a quiet shore, beneath silver sky, listen. You might hear the echo of oars. You might feel a feather brush your hand, and you'll know the story is never over. It only waits to be heard again. The lake did not forget, even when the world changed around it. Roads widened, screens flickered, towers grew taller. The lake remained still, not untouched, but unshaken. Its surface mirrored not just sky, but memory. Its silence was not absence. It was a presence so deep, it could not be heard by hurried minds. And in that silence, something pulsed, something old, something warm, something waiting. Ilya came often now. She never moved far from the lake. Not really. The village had grown, slowly and carefully, with wind chimes still in the windows and lanterns lit for those who wandered in late. She had become something of a storyteller. Not the kind who performed, but the kind whose stories lingered in the corners of rooms long after she left. She never forced the tales, she let them come. And more than that, she listened. She listened when children spoke without knowing why they were sad. She listened when old men stared out of windows, watching nothing. She listened when the wind shifted and no one else noticed. One day, a boy came to her door. He was maybe 10, maybe younger, shoes untied, cheeks streaked with dried tears. "I heard you have a boat." Ilya looked at him, long and gently. I have many stories, she said. Some have boats in them. I don't want a story, he said, voice cracking. I want to not feel like this anymore. There was no wind just then, no birds, the kind of stillness that wraps around the world like a hush. Ilya knelt beside him. Then you should come to the lake. That evening, they walked together. She and the boy with fists too tight for his age. The lake greeted them as it always had, quiet, steady, waiting. Luna was moored at her post, as though she, too, had been listening. Ilya said nothing. She stepped into the boat and offered her hand. The boy hesitated, then took it. They drifted. No oars, no direction, just movement. The boy didn't speak. He didn't need to. Ilya held her notebook in her lap. She didn't write. Not yet. Instead, she looked at the water. Sometimes, she said softly, we carry things we don't have words for. But the lake, it remembers the stories. We forget. It holds the pieces we drop along the way. He looked down at his reflection. What if I don't want to remember? Then just listen. They floated for a long time. And in that silence, the boy's breath slowed. The knot in his chest loosened. Something he couldn't name let go of him. Not all at once, but enough to begin. When they returned to shore, the boy didn't speak. But as he walked away, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something Ilya hadn't seen him carry. A small, white feather. He tucked it into her notebook. Just in case, he said, and ran. Years passed like ripples, not in straight lines, but in widening circles. The stories of the lake continued to echo. They found their way into lullabies, into poems, tucked into tree hollows, into songs sung by grandmothers with cloud-soft hands, and into Ilya's pages. She wrote a book. Not to be published, but to be planted. She left copies in bus stations, on library shelves, beneath cafe tables. Inside each one, she taped a single sentence on the first page. This story came from a lake that still listens. When you're ready, it's waiting. Some of the books found their way to distant cities. Others stayed close, passed hand to hand. But no matter how far they went, they always echoed back. One night, Ilya stood by the lake again. It was colder now. Her hair was streaked with silver. Her notebook, nearly full. She no longer needed to write every word. Many were written in the way she looked at the world. But there was one last story waiting. She opened the notebook. The final page. She didn't write with ink this time. She dipped a brush into the water and painted a single, curved stroke, like a feather caught on the wind. The mark shimmered, then faded. But the page was not empty. The story had been told, and the echo would remain. Somewhere, not far away, a new girl walks toward the lake, a blank notebook in her hands. The boat waits. The water stirs, and the feather falls quietly onto the dock, not from the sky, but from the memory of those who believed, listened, and loved. The lake remains, and so does the echo. The lake had never spoken in words, but its silence had become a language known by generations. Somewhere between the shimmer of moonlight and the soft lap of water, the message had always been the same. Listen, and carry it forward. That winter, for the first time in years, Luna drifted away from her dock without wind, without hands. The villagers watched from their windows as the old boat moved gently across the still, silver lake. As if guided by memory itself, she floated to the center, turned once, and stilled. No one was aboard. But the next morning, they found something waiting inside her. A bundle of notebooks. Some old, some new, all wrapped in a shawl, stitched with feathers. Each book carried a name. None were famous, but each had been a listener, a writer, a bearer of the hush. At the top of the pile, Ilya's last notebook, and inside, one final message written in watercolored ink. There is no end to a story that listens, only new voices. That spring, people began returning to the lake. Not just the curious, not just the lonely, but the in-between people. Those with quiet eyes and open hearts. They brought stories, songs, sketches. They brought children who had never seen real stars. They brought parents who had forgotten how to breathe slowly. And they sat on the bench beneath the sycamore. They floated in Luna, one at a time, or two by two. They added their pages to the growing library beneath the boathouse, a small structure now filled with candlelight and wind-danced papers. No guide, no ticket, no schedule, only this sign on the door. Whispers welcome. Speak if you must, but leave space for the hush. One evening, the clouds turned soft gold. In a quiet gathering formed by the lakeside, someone had brought lanterns shaped like feathers. Someone else had brought tea. A young girl began reading aloud from her own small book, hands trembling. And from behind the trees, a very old woman arrived, walking slowly. Her hair was silver. Her voice was gentle as dusk. And when she reached the dock, Luna came to her without a word. The villagers stood in stillness. She stepped in, holding nothing but a small wooden oar, carved long ago by her father. The boat drifted again, carrying her under the rising stars. As she reached the center of the lake, she turned, and though she was too far to hear, everyone on shore felt the words she was offering. You listened. You remembered. Now you are the story. And with that, the lake glowed faintly. Not bright, not loud, just deep. A ripple of moonlight touched every face on shore. Then the stars appeared, all at once, and Luna floated home. Years later, no one could recall exactly who the woman had been. Some said she was the original girl. Some said she was Ilya, grown old. Some said she was the lake itself, wearing human shape one last time. But it didn't matter, because the story was no longer one person's. It had been scattered, like feathers, across hundreds of lives, thousands of quiet moments, and it was still growing. The lake remains. The boat drifts, sometimes alone, sometimes carrying two strangers who don't yet know why they've come. And on especially quiet nights, if you listen just right, you can hear it. Not a song, not a word, but the echo, the one that says, there is no such thing as an ending, only another hush and another heart, ready to listen. The lake was quiet that morning, not silent, never truly silent, but quiet in a way that carried memory, the kind of quiet that came after a song, not before it. Mist lay over the water like a veil of breath. The sky wore the pale gold of beginnings, and from the little cottage nestled near the hill, a soft light glowed. Candlelight, steady and slow. Inside, a child stirred beneath a blanket made of patched stories, moons, feathers, boats, and stars. Her name was Ilya. She was 7. She had Myra's curiosity, Ilya's stillness, and eyes like storm-touched skies, always listening. That morning, she rose before the birds. She didn't wake her mother. She didn't need to. The lake had called her, and the lake was trusted. Barefoot, with a scarf wrapped twice around her neck, she made her way through dew-damp grass, across the old wooden dock, to where Luna waited, just as she always had. But this time, something shimmered in the boat. Not a book, not a note, a candle, lit, unflickering, though no hand had lit it. Beside it, a single golden feather, resting across the bench like it had just landed there. Ilya stood still, her breath clouding in the dawn air. She had heard the stories. Her mother had told them, not as tales to believe or not believe, but as truths waiting to be remembered. The candle's flame did not burn with heat. It glowed with presence, like the hush before something important, like the moment before you say something you mean. The girl stepped into the boat. The mist parted, just a little, enough for her to see the reflection of the candle dancing on the water. She held the feather. It was warm, and when she closed her eyes, the hush returned. That old, timeless hush that had passed from heart to heart since the lake first listened. Somewhere far away, someone stirred. A man sitting alone in a city cafe, hearing a song he didn't remember but suddenly knew. A girl reading a story on a train, pausing mid-sentence because something in her chest had fluttered. A teacher pausing before her next lesson, looking out the window as if expecting someone to arrive. They didn't know why, but they felt it. A stirring, a whisper, a soft returning. On the lake Luna drip. Ilya sat beside the candle, the feather in her lap, the mist curling around her like breath, and in the stillness, she heard them. Not with her ears, but with the part of her that dreams before sleep. All the voices, all the echoes, all the listeners who had come before. Myra's hush, Ilya's pen, the child who once wept and now built boats of his own, even the fairy who may never have left. They were not gone. They were part of the water now. The wind, the slow fold of memory into meaning. And now, so was she. That night, a new page was added to the boathouse wall. Blank, except for a single sentence, written in a hand small and sure. The lake is still listening. The flame has not gone out. My name is Ilya, and beneath it, pinned gently in place, with thread, a golden feather. And so the story continues, not in chapters, but in ripples, not in names, but in hearts, because some stories aren't meant to end. Some are meant to be carried, like candles, through wind, like feathers on fingertips. Some are meant to wait until you're ready, until you come, until you listen. The lake had a way of returning what mattered. Sometimes it returned memory, sometimes silence, sometimes a story half finished, and sometimes it returned letters. It was late spring when Ilya found the envelope. Luna had drifted out again, early in the morning, as she often did now. No oars, no rope, just a silent agreement with the wind. When Ilya came down to the shore, the boat was already back, rocking gently beside the dock. She stepped in, as she had many times before, and there it was, nestled beside the bench. An old envelope, weather-worn, edges curled, sealed with pressed lavender wax. On the front, only one word, Mira. Ilya's breath caught. She turned it over. The wax broke easily. Inside was a folded page, soft as breath, and written in ink, the color of dusk. The letter read, "To the one who listened first. I don't know if you remember me. I was the boy who never spoke. The one who cried beside the boat. You gave me a paper feather, folded from a page of your journal. You didn't say anything. You just left it there and walked away. That silence stayed with me. Not the kind that hurts. The kind that heals. The kind that knows. I left the lake soon after. I've been to cities, across oceans. I speak now. I write. I listen. But nothing has ever sounded quite like the hush you left in my chest. I've returned now, not for answers, for the question that started it all. Are you still there? Are you still listening? Underscore, no name, no address. Just a memory, folded in ink." Ilya stared at the letter for a long time. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She brought it to her mother. Mira sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the light fall through the trees. Her hair had turned all silver now, but her smile still carried the sky. When she read the letter, she said nothing at first. Then, "Yes, I remember him. He sat by the water and shook like leaves in wind, and he didn't want to be seen." She smiled quietly, eyes distant. "I didn't think he'd remember." Ilya tilted her head. "What will you do?" Mira looked out the window again, and then she stood. "I'll set another place at the table." That evening, they hung a lantern beside the dock. They left a blanket on the bench beneath the tree. They lit 3 candles, one for the past, one for the present, and one for whoever was coming. And they waited, not impatiently, but with the patience of trees and lakes and girls who had learned the language of listening. The next morning, a stranger arrived. He was older now, maybe 30, with wind-blown hair and shoes worn from walking. But his eyes were familiar. He didn't speak at first. He simply walked down the dock, touched Luna's side, and then turned to Mira. They didn't say hello. They nodded. The kind of nod that carried years inside it. Then Mira stepped aside, and the man knelt to greet Ilya. "You're her daughter," he said softly. Ilya nodded. "And you're the boy," she replied. He smiled, tears threatening, but not falling. Not anymore. That night, they sat around a fire near the water. No stories were told aloud. They simply listened. To the crackle, to the shifting wind, to the way the lake whispered when no one tried too hard. When the flames were low, the man handed Ilya a small box. "I kept this," he said. "All this time." Inside, a single paper feather. Worn. Folded. Mira reached out and touched it gently. "I only had the courage to give one," she whispered. But it found its way back. In the days that followed, more letters began to appear. Not always in envelopes. Sometimes in stones, marked with symbols. Sometimes carved into driftwood. Sometimes in the pauses of returning footsteps. And Luna kept moving, carrying strangers, friends, and those who had forgotten what they were seeking until they remembered. The boathouse grew full again. The wall of pages expanded beyond its frame. Ilya began stitching a new quilt. This one not made of moons and boats, but of words. She called it the listening cloth, and visitors added lines to it with ink and thread. One read, "I forgot who I was until I heard the wind again." Another, "Not all who wander are lost. Some are just finding the hush." And one, stitched with trembling hands by a woman in her 90s. "I was a storm, but I learned to float. The lake remembers. The boat returns. The feather glows only for those who pause. And the echo, it remains, not in the distance now, but within." Because the letter that floated back wasn't just a message. It was a promise that the story never left. It just waited, like all good stories do. The summer Ilya turned 10, the lake began calling her in a new way. It wasn't louder, just deeper. At night, when she slept, she dreamed of reflections that didn't match the sky, of stars twinkling under the surface, of voices soft as lullabies, rising not from air, but from water. One morning, she woke with a whisper in her ear, clear as morning wind. "Come see where the sky truly begins." She stood at the edge of the dock, barefoot, the feather thread still tied to her wrist, the surface of the lake smooth as brushed glass. Luna rocked gently behind her, but this time, she didn't step into the boat. She stepped into the lake. The cold shocked her at first, not in a harsh way, but like a memory you didn't expect to feel again. Then she sank, not panicking, not sinking like stone, but gliding, like a thought sliding into the quiet center of the mind, down, through layers of soft blue and dark silver, the sunlight dancing like petals above her. And then she broke through, not into more water, into sky. Below her was no longer the lake. It was stars, constellations, swirls of dreamlight, a sky turned upside down, or perhaps right side up. She floated in a vast twilight realm where boats sailed through starlight. Not on it, and clouds hung low like curtains of breath. And before her stood a dock, old, wooden, familiar. At its edge sat a small boat, shaped like Luna, only finer, glowing faintly, with carvings on its sides she couldn't quite read. A figure stood waiting. The fairy, older now, or maybe simply clearer. Her wings had grown translucent gold. Her dress shimmered like memories sewn with mourning. She smiled. "You have come farther than most." Ilya said nothing. She didn't need to. Her heart was open, her ears wide, her breath slow. The fairy pointed to the stars beneath them. "These are not just stars," she said. "They are the dreams that never had words, the wishes made in silence, the thoughts carried away by wind." Ilya blinked. "Are they mine?" "Some," the fairy whispered. "Some are your mother's, some your grandmother's, some from strangers who sat by this lake before it had a name." The stars pulsed gently, each a breath, a sigh, a beginning. "They wait," the fairy continued. "They wait to be remembered, to be heard. Some will rise again, if the right voice calls them. Some will become feathers, some flame, some will become you. Ilya reached her hand out. A single star drifted into her palm. It wasn't hot, but it vibrated softly, like a word wanting to be spoken. She held it to her heart, and it melted into her. Not lost. When she rose back to the surface, the morning sun had shifted, and birds traced lazy circles above. Mira stood at the shore, watching. I felt it, her mother said gently. The stillness. Ilya nodded. There's a sky beneath the lake, she whispered, and it remembers everything. From that day forward, something changed. Not dramatically, quietly. The way lakes change with the seasons. Ilya began to write. Not just in journals, but in air, with movements, with songs, with pauses that held entire stories inside them. And the people who visited felt it. Children who came to sit by the water began drawing constellations in the sand. Old men stared longer into the ripples before they spoke. One visitor, a scientist, called the lake impossibly magnetic. But Mira knew, and Ilya knew, it wasn't the lake that pulled them. It was the echo of their own voices, calling back from beneath the water, hoping to be heard. And Luna, she too changed. Her carvings deepened. Her wood shimmered when starlight touched her. Some swore she hummed, ever so softly, when left alone. And some nights, when the mist was thick and the wind just right, she would drift out without anyone rowing, and return with a single feather resting in her seat, always golden, always warm. In time, Ilya began teaching others how to listen, not in schools, not with chalk, but on wind-worn benches, in sunlit clearings, on the edge of the dock where sky and lake seemed to trade places. She called her circle the deep They weren't poets or prophets, just listeners, whisper carriers, flame keepers. One of them, a quiet boy who never spoke in full sentences, once told her, I think my dreams learned how to swim. And she smiled. That means they're ready to fly next. The sky beneath the lake still waits, not with urgency, but with patience, because some truths aren't written in stone. They're felt in the water, heard in the hush, carried in the heart of a girl who dared to dive deeper, and found not endings, but beginnings. Many seasons later, in a world changed yet somehow the same, a traveler arrived by train to a village no longer marked on maps. She carried no suitcase, only a satchel filled with notebooks and sketches. Her name was never asked. It didn't matter. She had followed a whisper, a passage in an old book left behind on a park bench. There is a lake where the stories go when the world forgets them. Follow the silence, and you may find your own. She walked past the bakery where the windows chimed gently in the breeze, past cottages with wind chimes and ivy-covered porches. The people greeted her with knowing smiles, though none asked why she'd come. She walked until the trees thinned, and the lake appeared, still as ever. Still, yet not still. Something pulsed beneath the surface. Not movement, not light. Memory. Luna was there, moored gently, as if held in a cradle of time. The traveler stepped toward the boat, pausing as she saw something caught in the reeds. A feather, impossibly golden, glinting in the evening sun. She picked it up, pressed it to her chest. Something stirred in her. Not recognition, but return. She stepped into Luna without fear. As the boat creaked and drifted forward, clouds gathered above, soft as breath. The lake opened before her, silent and infinite. And in that hush, she began to hum. A melody not learned, but remembered. And if you were there that night, standing quietly on the shore, you might have heard it too. You might have felt the hush settle in your chest. You might have remembered something long forgotten. Because stories, once whispered to the water, are never truly gone. They wait. And when the time is right, they find you. Just as Luna always does. The end. And the beginning.